Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night Podcast. Story 1. The Father's Tears. On the outside, the house in Frederick, Colorado was the perfect picture of the American dream. A spacious two-story home, a meticulously green lawn, and the sound of children's laughter. Everything seemed to be exactly where it should be. This was the residence of the Watts family. Chris, the mild-mannered husband working for an energy company. Shanann, the energetic wife, pregnant with their third child. And their two beautiful daughters, Bella, 4, and Celeste, 3. Two little angels with golden hair and innocent chatter. On a scorching August day in 2018, that perfect picture was brutally torn apart. Shanann returned home from a business trip. The next morning, she and her two daughters vanished without a trace. The first person to raise the alarm was Chris Watts himself. He called the police, his face a mask of panic and sorrow. He claimed Shanann and the girls must have gone somewhere without leaving a note, and that he couldn't reach them. The house was eerily silent, with no signs of struggle. Yet Shanann's car was still in the garage, along with her phone and wallet. In the days that followed, Chris Watts performed a masterful act. He appeared on national television, pleading for his wife and children to return, his eyes welling up with tears. "If you are out there, if somebody has them," he whispered, "please bring them back. I miss them. Everyone misses them." His voice was filled with such desperation that all of America believed he was a broken father and husband shattered by grief. The public offered deep sympathy, and search teams worked tirelessly. However, the investigating detectives noticed peculiar details. Chris seemed too calm, too cooperative, and his statements shifted subtly. A neighbor's security camera had captured Chris moving his work truck on the morning Shanann disappeared, an action that appeared hurried and suspicious. When interrogated by police, Chris maintained his role as the grieving husband, but the pressure mounted. One of his clearest motives was exposed, an extramarital affair with a coworker. He was desperate to escape his marriage, craving a new life free of family responsibilities. Finally, the facade collapsed. Chris was cornered by undeniable evidence. In a chilling and cold confession, he revealed the horrific truth. That night, after Shanann returned, they had a violent argument. Chris wanted a divorce. When Shanann threatened to take the children and the assets, Chris acted. He strangled his wife until she drew her last breath. Then, the unspeakable happened. He loaded Shanann's body and his two living daughters, Bella and Celeste, into his truck. He drove to a remote worksite belonging to his energy company. There, he buried Shanann's body. But his crime did not end there. The two little girls, who may have witnessed the horrifying ordeal, were still in the truck. Instead of stopping, Chris murdered his own flesh and blood. He drowned both Bella and Celeste, his tiny angels, in two separate crude oil storage tanks on the property. The sheer cruelty and calculation of this act are bone-chilling. Chris Watts didn't just commit murder, he utterly annihilated a family. The case exposed a painful truth. Sometimes, the person you trust and love the most is the hidden monster. The tears Chris Watts shed on television were not tears of loss, but the tears of a perpetrator trying to cover up his monstrous crime. Story 2. The Shadow Behind the Marriage. This story takes us to Bolingbrook, Illinois, the home of Drew Peterson, a veteran police sergeant with a confident, even arrogant demeanor, notorious for his failed and scandalous marriages. To the neighbors, Drew was a law enforcer, but to the women in his life, he was a nightmare. The focal point of the case is Stacy Peterson, Drew's much younger fourth wife. Stacy disappeared in 2007. It happened abruptly. One day, Stacy was simply gone. Drew Peterson appeared unnervingly nonchalant. He claimed Stacy had run away with another man, perhaps due to marital stress and a desire to escape her family life. This explanation initially raised skepticism, but there was no immediate proof against Drew. However, Stacy's disappearance triggered an irreversible chain of events. Police began to revisit the death of Drew's third wife, Kathleen Savio. 4 years prior, Kathleen had been found dead in her bathtub. The case was initially ruled an accidental drowning. She had supposedly slipped and died. But following Stacy's vanishing, investigators began to question, was Kathleen Savio's death truly an accident? They exhumed Kathleen's body. A second autopsy revealed shocking truths. The injuries on Kathleen's body were inconsistent with a common fall. They showed signs of a violent assault. The medical examiner concluded that it was, in fact, a homicide. Police suspected Drew had meticulously staged the scene to make his wife's death look like an accident, using his intimate knowledge of police procedures to mislead the investigation. Drew Peterson was now the prime suspect in both cases. He had used his authority and understanding of the legal system as both a shield and a weapon. He maintained an arrogant and defiant posture toward the media, even smiling when questioned about the fate of his wives. Despite Stacy Peterson's body never being found, prosecutors built a strong case based on testimony from Stacy's family and friends. They testified that Stacy was terrified of her husband, and that she had told them about Drew murdering Kathleen Savio. This was a challenging no-body, no-crime case, relying heavily on hearsay and out-of-court statements. In the trial for Kathleen Savio's murder, Stacy's accounts of the event became crucial evidence. The listener is drawn into the complexity and drama of the case, where a police officer, a man trusted to protect the community, turned into a cold-blooded killer inside his own home. Ultimately, Drew Peterson was convicted of murdering Kathleen Savio. His case serves as a chilling reminder of how those who hold power can abuse it, and how a husband can turn the family home into a repository of deadly secrets. Stacy Peterson remains missing, but the shadow of Drew Peterson's guilt was fully exposed. Story 3. Envy turns to bloodshed. This story takes us to a small, sleepy town in Oklahoma, a place where everyone knows everyone else, and secrets are hard to keep. Our main characters are two brothers, Jerry and Danny. Danny, the younger brother, was always seen as the more successful one. He was a savvy businessman, earned more money, and was consistently the center of attention within the family and the community. In contrast, Jerry, the elder brother, was quiet, always overshadowed by his siblings' dazzling success. The relationship between them, already strained since childhood by their parents' constant comparisons, reached a breaking point when their father passed away and left a substantial estate. The father's will was not entirely clear, leading to a long and bitter dispute over a valuable piece of farmland. For Jerry, it wasn't just about the money. It was about recognition, the feeling of being prioritized that he had never experienced. He believed he deserved the land more than Danny, who already had everything. The envy simmering in Jerry's heart gradually transformed into violent rage. He felt cheated, rejected by his family once again. Meanwhile, Danny, tired of his brother's jealousy, was cold and determined to protect the share of the assets he believed was rightfully his. Late one dark night, Jerry went to the disputed farm where Danny was working. A massive argument erupted between them, with insults and bitter words flying, resurrecting all the old wounds. When the anger reached its peak, Jerry lost control. He had brought a gun with him, and in a moment of madness, he shot Danny. What makes this case chilling is not the spontaneous act of murder, but Jerry's cold-blooded actions afterward. Instead of panicking or calling the police, Jerry decided to cover up his crime. He dumped his brother's body in a remote area of the farm and attempted to destroy the evidence, staging a disappearance. For weeks, Jerry played the role of the grieving brother, assisting the police in the search for his sibling. He participated in interviews, speaking of his longing and hope of finding Danny alive. But detectives noted the absence of genuine emotion, the emptiness in Jerry's eyes. Finally, a small clue regarding Danny's truck and some contradictory statements from Jerry led police back to the farm. There, they found suspicious traces. When interrogated again, Jerry finally broke down and confessed. The case of Jerry, unrelated to the Watts case in episode 1, is a profound tragedy of brotherhood. It exposes how envy and insecurity can erode a person's soul, turning a sacred bond of blood into an act of horrific violence, all over a piece of land and a feeling of being unjustly treated. Story 4. The Generational Curse. We turn back the clock to Beverly Hills, California in the 1980s, where wealth and glamour concealed a gruesome tragedy. This is the story of the brothers Lyle and Eric Menendez. Their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, were powerful and wealthy figures. Jose was a prominent film executive, and Kitty was a socialite mother. On the surface, their two sons, Lyle and Eric, had it all: expensive cars, luxurious vacations, and a privileged life. Yet, on a night in August 1989, that perfect picture was stained with blood. Jose and Kitty were brutally shot to death with shotguns in the living room of their mansion. The nature of the crime, its savagery, shocked the public. Initially, the Menendez brothers appeared frantic and grief-stricken, claiming they had just returned home from the movies. Afterward, however, they began exhibiting bizarre and suspicious behavior. Mere days after their parents' deaths, Lyle and Eric started spending their enormous inheritance lavishly. They purchased Porsches, Rolex watches, designer clothes, and even hired a professional tennis coach. This excessive shopping therapy fueled suspicion among the police and the public. The big question was posed: how could a son indulge in such an extravagant life so soon after his parents were savagely murdered? The truth began to unravel when Eric, the younger brother, confessed the crime to his psychologist, who later breached confidentiality and reported the admission. Police discovered that Lyle and Eric themselves had planned and executed the murders. They bought the guns, learned how to use them, and waited for the perfect moment. During the long and dramatic trial, the motive for the killings was unveiled. Prosecutors argued it was greed. The two sons wanted to inherit their parents' multi-million-dollar estate to live a life of unrestricted freedom. However, the defense lawyers painted an entirely different picture, a history of horrific abuse. They claimed that Jose Menendez was physically and sexually abusive father, and Kitty, the mother, was aware but looked the other way. They argued that the murders were an act of self-defense after years of threats and psychological torture. The testimony at the trial, though controversial, described a toxic family environment where love was replaced by control, fear, and manipulation. The listener is forced to confront the difficult question: could the act of murder be considered liberation from a family curse? Ultimately, despite the context of abuse being presented, the jury concluded that Lyle and Eric's actions were calculated and driven by greed. They were sentenced to life imprisonment. The Menendez case is a horrifying story of how wealth cannot conceal the deep internal wounds within a family, and how oppressed children can erupt in an act of ultimate violence, resulting in the killing of those who gave them life. Story 5. The Tragedy of the Party Night. This story takes place in rural Texas, where weekend nights often revolved around bonfire parties. The central figures are Shane and Victor, two close friends since high school. They grew up together, shared every secret, and seemed inseparable. However, their friendship harbored a toxic element, underlying competition, and a habit of resolving conflicts with sharp, cutting words. One Saturday night, Shane, Victor, and a group of other friends gathered at a secluded house for a party. Alcohol and substances began to dissolve inhibitions. Initially, the atmosphere was fun, but then things took a dark turn. Shane and Victor began teasing each other, at first in good humor, but as the alcohol took hold, the jokes became personal, insulting, and directly attacked each other's deepest insecurities. Hurt feelings and impulsivity were amplified by the liquor. The argument quickly escalated into a physical confrontation. Amidst the loud music and the shouting of the other friends, Shane, in an uncontrollable fit of rage, grabbed a heavy object nearby, perhaps a bottle or a sturdy decorative item, and struck Victor hard on the head. Victor collapsed to the floor. Silence fell over the room. Victor's death was not a planned murder. It was a spontaneous burst of violence resulting from a loss of control. What makes this story chilling are the actions of the friends who witnessed it. Instead of calling for an ambulance or the police, they succumbed to panic, and worse, decided to cover up the crime. Shane pleaded with his friends to stay silent. Fearing for their own futures and swept up in the collective terror, the group agreed. Together, they disposed of Victor's body, taking him to a distant wooded area and attempting a hasty burial. They scrubbed away the blood, cleaned the scene, and agreed that the official story would be that Victor had driven off while drunk. For months afterward, this tragedy became a collective secret, weighing heavily on the consciences of the entire group. Their friendship dissolved, replaced by suspicion and the constant fear of exposure. Shane continued his life, but every knock on the door filled him with dread. Eventually, the burden of the secret became too much. One of the friends, unable to handle the psychological pressure, decided to confess to the police. The confession broke the silence and led to the discovery of Victor's remains. When the truth was revealed, it exposed not only a brutal murder, but also the moral decay of a group of young people who chose to protect the killer over seeking justice for their fallen friend. This case is a cold warning about how peer pressure, impulsivity, and substance abuse can turn a carefree party night into a bloody tragedy, permanently destroying not only the victim's life, but also the lives of everyone else involved. Story 6. The Perfect Predator. We move away from crimes of passion among family and friends to confront pure, calculated evil. This story focuses on Ted Bundy, who became the terrifying archetype of the serial killer. His crimes spanned multiple states throughout the 1970s, leaving a long trail of horror and deep suspicion. What makes Bundy uniquely chilling is the contrast between his appearance and his true nature. Bundy was not a social outcast or a drug addict. He was a charismatic, intelligent man who graduated with a psychology degree and even attended law school. He possessed a trustworthy demeanor that made people, especially young women, feel safe in his presence. This charm and intelligence were his main hunting tools. Bundy's modus operandi often began with faking an injury. He would pretend to have a broken arm or a leg injury, then approach young female victims in public spaces, such as beaches or college campuses, and ask for help. The victim's kindness and sympathy were the deadly bait. The case began to draw national attention as numerous young women with long center-parted hair continuously disappeared in Washington and Utah. Police were baffled as there seemed to be no clear connection between the victims, other than their similar appearance. The case gained notoriety when Bundy was first arrested. However, using his intelligence and cunning, he escaped from jail twice, each escape leading to new and more brutal murders. One of the most horrifying nights occurred at the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. Bundy broke into the house at night, using a club to attack 4 sleeping female students, killing 2 and severely injuring 2 others. This audacious and cruel act proved his uncontrollable urge to kill. When Bundy was finally apprehended, his trial was a chaotic spectacle. Bundy sometimes represented himself, demonstrating a deep understanding of the law, yet also displaying a terrifying coldness. He was convicted of murder with strong forensic evidence, bite marks found on a victim's body. Over the years, Bundy only admitted to around 30 murders, but investigators believe the real number could be much higher. He used his words and body language to manipulate the public and the court until the very last minute. The story of Ted Bundy is a horrific glimpse into the mind of a true psychopath. He teaches us a chilling lesson. Evil does not always wear a frightening guise. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the person standing next to you, smiling and offering help, with a perfect exterior hiding a dark abyss of brutality. Story 7. Secrets Beneath the Ice. This story begins in Modesto, California, on Christmas Eve, 2002. Lacey Peterson, 27, was 8 months pregnant, eagerly awaiting the arrival of the unborn child she and her husband, Scott Peterson, were expecting. In the public eye, they were the perfect couple, living in a beautiful home, preparing for Christmas and a new addition to the family. On December 24th, Lacey suddenly vanished. Scott Peterson, the husband, told police he had left that morning to go fishing in the San Francisco Bay, about 90 miles away. When he returned, Lacey was gone. Her car was still at home, but their dog was left in the yard with its leash still attached. Like Chris Watts in episode 1, Scott Peterson quickly became the focus of media and public attention. He appeared on television shows, appealing for help in finding Lacey, portraying himself as distraught and worried. Photos of Lacey, the young woman with the radiant smile and large baby bump, dominated the news. However, investigators and the public began to sense an abnormality in Scott's behavior. He was too calm, too detached, while everyone else was frantically searching for his wife. Questions began to surface. Why would Scott go fishing on a holiday, especially with his wife so close to giving birth? And why would he fish in such a distant location, a place he rarely visited? Under investigative pressure, Scott's secret was exposed. He had been having a prolonged extramarital affair with Amber Fry, a massage therapist who was completely unaware that Scott was married and about to become a father. When questioned by police, Scott lied about his relationship with Amber and later continued to lie about his exact whereabouts on the day Lacey disappeared. Detectives discovered that Scott had purchased a new boat weeks earlier and that his fishing trip was a pretext for him to be present at the San Francisco Bay. Amber Fry, upon learning the truth, cooperated with the police. She secretly recorded conversations with Scott, where he continued to maintain his facade, even lying that Lacey had died of an illness and he was trying to cope with the grief. These recordings painted a picture of a cold, calculating man, only concerned with maintaining his deception to start a new life. 4 months later, in April 2003, the tragic answer arrived. Lacey's body and that of the fetus washed ashore on the coast of the San Francisco Bay, near where Scott claimed to have been fishing. This evidence confirmed what many had suspected. Lacey had not run away. She had been murdered. Prosecutors argued that Scott killed Lacey at home, then used his newly purchased boat to transport her body to the bay and dispose of it in the ocean, hoping the tide would erase all traces. His motive was a desire to escape family responsibility and pursue Amber Frey. The trial of Scott Peterson became a major national event, focusing on greed, deception, and horrific betrayal. Ultimately, Scott Peterson was convicted of first-degree murder for Lacey and second-degree murder for the fetus, later reduced to life imprisonment. The Lacey Peterson case is a profound tragedy, exposing the danger of the perfect liar who exploited his wife's trust and the public's sympathy to conceal his brutal act. Story 8. The Scary Neighbor. We come now to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, during the late 1980s and early 1990s. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, a name that has become synonymous with madness and ultimate evil. Unlike the deadly charm of Ted Bundy, Dahmer was a shy, quiet, seemingly unremarkable man, living in a small unit, apartment 213, of a modest complex. Dahmer secretly carried out a series of gruesome crimes over many years. He targeted young men, primarily those of color and the vulnerable, luring them back to his apartment with promises of money or photography modeling. Once inside, Dahmer murdered them and, more horrifically, committed acts of dismemberment, necrophilia, cannibalism, and kept body parts as souvenirs. What makes this case particularly terrifying is the proximity of the crimes. Dahmer performed all these acts right inside his apartment, next door to neighbors he encountered daily in the hallway or elevator. Edward led police back to Dahmer's apartment. When officers entered apartment 213, they discovered an unimaginable scene of horror, a museum of terror. They found preserved human heads in the refrigerator, body parts in the freezer, skulls and Polaroids documenting his heinous crimes. Jeffrey Dahmer's arrest sent shockwaves across the nation. It exposed a brutal truth. A serial killer, a cannibal, could operate undetected for years, hiding in plain sight within the community. Furthermore, it raised deep questions about racial bias and indifference within the police force, as their neglect of minority and gay victims facilitated Dahmer's continued crimes. The Dahmer story is a chilling dissection of a mind obsessed with isolation and twisted desires. He embodies the terrifying fact that evil is not always hidden in the shadows. Sometimes, it is the quiet neighbor you simply nod to in the hallway. Story 9. The Deviant Daughter. This story takes us to Markham, Ontario, Canada, a globally famous case fitting the criteria for horror and intrigue, the home of the Pan family. They were Vietnamese immigrants who worked tirelessly and saved to ensure the best possible life for their only daughter, Jennifer Pan. Jennifer Pan, on the surface, was talented and obedient, but under the intense scrutiny and colossal expectations from her parents, particularly her father, Han Pan, a secret life began to form. Jennifer's parents always set extremely high academic standards. Jennifer, buckling under the pressure, started lying. She lied about attending university, graduating, and even having a volunteer job at a hospital, all just to please her parents. In reality, she had failed to gain admission to university and spent years drifting, constructing an intricate web of deceit. When her parents discovered the truth, they grew suspicious that Jennifer wasn't actually going to work, and later followed her. They reacted with extreme anger and control. They confiscated her phone, forbade her from leaving the house, and severed her relationship with her boyfriend, Daniel Wong. Feeling imprisoned and deprived of her personal life, the resentment within Jennifer escalated into a ruthless plan. Jennifer craved freedom and money, particularly the substantial inheritance. She decided that the only way to escape her parents' control was to eliminate them. She contacted her ex-boyfriend, Daniel Wong, and asked him to hire 3 hitmen to stage a fake robbery. On an evening in November 2010, the plan was executed. 3 assailants burst into the Pan home. Jennifer was inside, feigning an attack and having her hands tied. They took her and her parents downstairs to the basement. Then her mother, Bitch Ha Pan, was shot dead instantly. Her father, Han Pan, was shot in the face. After the attackers left, Jennifer called 911 in a panicked, tearful voice, recounting details of the robbery and violence. She was the only one not seriously injured. Initially, police believed the shocked and hysterical young woman's account. However, Han Pan, the father, miraculously survived the gunshot. When he awoke in the hospital, he provided a shocking statement. His daughter, Jennifer, was acquainted with one of the assailants. Mr. Han Pan's testimony tore apart Jennifer's perfect act. Under interrogation pressure, especially when detectives pointed out inconsistencies in her account of how she was tied up and how the attackers behaved, Jennifer began to crack. She eventually confessed that she had hired people to kill her parents, initially intending only to stage a contract killing, but later going through with this plan. The Jennifer Pan case is a horrifying story about family pressure and cumulative lies. It exposes how a daughter could coldly plot to destroy the very people who sacrificed everything for her, turning her dream of freedom and wealth into a bloody nightmare. Story 10. Toxic Love and Control. The series concludes with a case that took place in Mesa, Arizona, where a romantic relationship spiraled into obsession and ultimately a bloody tragedy. This is the story of Jodi Arias and Travis Alexander. Travis Alexander was a motivational speaker and a charismatic man. Jodi Arias was a freelance photographer who became intensely infatuated with Travis. Their relationship, though brief, was fraught with passion, jealousy, and control. They broke up, but Jodi refused to accept it. She became pathologically obsessed with Travis. Despite Travis's attempts to cut ties and start a new relationship, Jodi clung to him. She stalked him, broke into his home, and even followed him on dates. Their relationship became toxic, filled with cycles of promised reconciliation and fierce arguments. The climax of this obsession occurred in June 2008. Jodi Arias drove over 1,000 miles from California to Arizona to see Travis. What happened inside Travis's home that day became the focus of a long and dramatic trial that captivated the nation. Travis Alexander was found dead in his bathroom, his body stabbed a total of 27 times, his throat slit deeply, and finally shot in the head. The brutality of the murder indicated an uncontrollable rage and profound hatred. When police began their investigation, Jodi Arias quickly became the prime suspect. She repeatedly changed her story. Initially, she flatly denied being in Arizona on the day of the murder. Then, when forensic evidence, including her DNA at the scene and photos she had taken herself, even capturing Travis just before and during the attack, was presented, she was forced to change her narrative. Her second testimony was a fabricated story about 2 mysterious intruders who broke into the house and killed Travis, claiming she fled in fear. Finally, at trial, Jodi offered her third version. She killed Travis in self-defense. She claimed that Travis was an abuser and she was forced to act after he attacked her. Her testimony was detailed, dramatic, and tearful, but riddled with inconsistencies and deception. The trial of Jodi Arias became a media spectacle, exposing the dark corners of a love that had devolved into madness. Prosecutors argued that Jodi had deliberately planned to kill Travis after realizing she could not have him. The act of stabbing him multiple times, slitting his throat, and then shooting him in the head showed an ultimate determination to destroy him. This case is a chilling warning about the dangers of obsession and toxic love. It illustrates how the most powerful human emotion, love, can be warped into a driving force for violence and murder. Jodi Arias was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. This 10-episode series has taken listeners deep into the darkest corners of human nature. From betrayal within the family, father kills children, husband kills wife, brother kills brother, child kills parents, to crimes in society, friends kill friends, serial killers, all based on true cases that have shaken the United States and Canada.